For 3 years, Min-Jae Park came home to a covered plate in the fridge and a wife already in bed. For 3 years, he walked past that plate, ate standing at the counter, and told himself this was fine. For 3 years, Adaeze said nothing. Then she started coming home at 3 a.m., and suddenly he couldn't sleep at all. This is that story. The building was quiet, but Adaeze wasn't ready to go upstairs yet. 2:47 a.m. and Victoria Island had gone still, just the hum of generators and the distant push of the Atlantic against the marina. A pearl-white Lexus sat engine off in the underground garage of the Meridian, the tallest residential tower on Victoria Island. Inside, Adaeze Soon Park had her heels abandoned on the passenger seat, a suya wrap balanced on her knee, and her phone propped on the steering wheel. She was watching a reel of otters folding hands while they slept, and every time they drifted apart and reached for each other again, she made a sound like the world had been briefly fixed. Her husband was 14 floors above her head. She had been gone since before 8 p.m., and she was in absolutely no hurry to go upstairs. That detail, that one small, quiet, devastating detail, tells you everything about this marriage that the wedding photos never could. To understand Adaeze Okonkwo, you have to start with the woman who made her. Mama Okonkwo raised her daughter in a 2-bedroom flat in Warri with no help, no complaints, and a cast-iron authority that did not require volume. She was the kind of woman who could correct you with a pause, just a pause, a half-second delay before she responded to something you said that would leave you replaying the conversation for 3 days, wondering exactly which part of yourself had disappointed her. Adaeze grew up watching her mother negotiate with landlords, settle disputes between neighbors, and stretch a pot of agusi soup into what felt like a spiritual experience. She filed all of it quietly into who she was becoming. She arrived in Lagos at 22 with a borrowed suitcase and enough nerve to embarrass people twice her age. Within 18 months, she had a job in a hotel kitchen, a 1-room apartment in Yaba she had talked herself into for 30% below asking price, and a best friend named Sola Bello, who had attached herself to Adaeze at their NYSC orientation like something that had been looking for a place to land. Sola was the kind of person who made strangers feel immediately that they had always known her and would spend the rest of their lives slightly exhausted by her. She had opinions about everything, filters about nothing, and a loyalty so ferocious it occasionally became its own problem. She had once, on Adaeze's behalf, sent a strongly worded voice note to a man who had stood Adaeze up, not because Adaeze asked her to, but because Sola felt it needed to be said and had appointed herself the one to say it. That was Sola, a force of nature operating at human scale. They were at a rooftop engagement party in Ikoyi on a humid Thursday in October when Adaeze looked across the terrace and saw Min-Jae Park standing alone by the railing with a glass of palm wine he clearly didn't know how to drink. He was Korean, quietly dressed in a way that managed to be expensive without performing it, and he was looking at the Lagos skyline with the expression of a man who had decided before he even arrived that tonight would not be for him. That expression was his first mistake. Adaeze crossed the terrace, stood beside him without introduction, and said, "You're holding that glass like it personally offended you." He looked at her. Something behind his carefully composed face shifted, just slightly, just enough. "The taste is more aggressive than I expected," he said. His Yoruba was slow and considered, each word placed like he had practiced it. A man who made an effort. "Everything in Lagos is more aggressive than you expect. You get used to it or you leave." He almost smiled, just almost, and that almost, that small, incomplete, entirely involuntary movement at the corner of his mouth, reached into her chest and took something she didn't know she'd been holding out. His name was Min-Jae Park. He worked in import logistics. He had been in Lagos for 2 years and had been to exactly this many rooftop parties before tonight. 0. They talked until the string lights started being turned off around them and a staff member cleared his throat twice before they noticed. For 7 months after that Thursday, he showed up in ways that quietly rewrote what showing up meant. He didn't send flowers, he sent voice notes at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday just to say he'd been thinking about something you said 2 weeks ago and had finally worked out why it was funny. He didn't make grand plans. He remembered that you'd mentioned once in passing that you'd never eaten proper Korean ramyeon and showed up one Saturday with 6 varieties and a quiet determination to find your favorite. He was not flashy. He was present, completely, consistently, without being asked. Mama Okonkwo flew in from Wari when she heard the word proposal and sat Adaeze down with 2 cups of tea and the expression of a woman who has already run every scenario. Adaeze, this man is kind to you now, but kindness when life is easy tells you nothing. You want to see a man when something breaks, when money disappears, when he is tired and afraid. That is when you see who someone actually is. She wrapped both hands around her cup. You don't know this man in the dark yet. She heard every word. She heard them so clearly she could recite them back years later. But she was 31, and she had been careful her whole life, and Min-Jae Park made careful feel like a waste of time. She said yes. The wedding was small and beautiful and real. Mama Okonkwo cried at the altar and then denied it for the next 4 years. Sola gave a toast that started as a speech and turned into a one-woman performance piece that people quoted back to her for months. And for 3 months after, the marriage was everything, textured and warm and full of the kind of ordinary happiness that doesn't photograph well, but that you feel in your chest like something that has finally settled. Then came the Wednesday. Month 4. Min-Jae received a phone call at dinner, excused himself, and was gone for 45 minutes. When he came back to the table, the food was cold, and something behind his eyes had changed in a way Adaeze felt before she could name. He ate without tasting. He answered her questions with the surface of his attention. He kissed her forehead when they went to bed. He had never missed that, but his mind was already somewhere she had no map to. She didn't push that night. She told herself it was work stress, which was reasonable. She told herself this for 3 weeks before she understood that it was no longer reasonable. By month 5, he was leaving the apartment before she woke and returning after she slept. By month 7, the Tuesday voice notes, the ones she had quietly come to organize her afternoons around, had stopped completely. She noticed their absence the way you notice a sound that had been there so long you only register it once it's gone, suddenly, completely, with a specific hollow quality where it used to be. She asked him once. She did not ask carefully. She asked the way Mama Okonkwo had taught her to ask anything important. Min-Jae, I need you to tell me what happened, because the man who used to send me voice notes about jokes I made 2 weeks ago has been replaced by someone who cannot look me in the eye at dinner, and I deserve an explanation. He put down his fork. He looked at her for a long time, long enough for her to grip the edge of the table waiting for something true to arrive. Then he said, quietly and with the specific gentleness of a man who knew exactly how insufficient it was, I'm working through some things. It has nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with her. That was the problem. Iya Sunshine was Adaeze's answer to the question her marriage had stopped asking. She had registered the business in the 2nd year, rented the space in Lekki Phase 1 in the 3rd year, and poured into it everything she had that no longer had anywhere else to go. The creativity, the care, the obsessive attention to detail that had originally gone into cooking for a man who stopped tasting the food. The restaurant occupied a converted colonial storefront with exposed brick walls and windows that let in the kind of afternoon light that made everything inside look like it was worth a second look. The menu changed seasonally. The smell? Brown butter, crayfish, something warm and slightly sweet from whatever was testing in the kitchen had become identifiable from half a block away. By the time the Eco Grand contract appeared, Iya Sunshine had a following, not a massive one, but a fierce one, the kind of customers who booked a week in advance and brought visiting relatives specifically to show it off. The Eco Grand Hotel wanted that feeling inside their presidential suite program. Full creative control for Adaeze, real volume, the kind of visibility that changes what a business can become. She told Sola on a Tuesday afternoon in the back kitchen, and Sola's response was so loud and so sustained that a customer at table 5 asked if everything was okay. It was more than okay. It was the beginning of something. The hotel sent their hospitality director 3 days later. Kwame Asante walked into Iya Sunshine with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once entered a room assuming it would be hostile. Ghanaian, easy in his skin, with the particular quality of making whoever he spoke to feel entirely seen. He moved through the restaurant slowly, looked at everything, touched nothing, and then sat across from Adaeze and said, "I want to understand what you've built here before we talk about anything else. What does this place mean to you?" It was a strange question for a business meeting. Adaeze answered it anyway, and somewhere in the answering she felt something in her chest loosen that she hadn't realized was tight. Kwame came back 3 days a week. They worked on the menu together late into most evenings, with Sola maintaining running commentary from the front counter about everything from the sauce consistency to the feng shui of the service window. Kwame and Adaeze argued productively about technique, laughed over failures, and ate unreasonable quantities of test food while Lagos went quiet outside the windows. He was easy company, the genuinely easy kind, not the performing kind. He never made her feel like she had to manage him. She did not tell Min-Jae about the contract, not the deal, not the hours, not Kwame. She told herself it was because Min-Jae never asked, and this was true, but underneath the truth of it was something quieter and harder to look at, that she had stopped imagining her husband as someone she brought things to. That somewhere in 3 years she had learned, without deciding to, that her excitement was not something this marriage could hold anymore. So her biggest professional victory existed entirely outside her marriage, like a door she had stopped offering him the key to. The 3 a.m. returns started that same week, and on the 14th floor of the Meridian, a man who had been sleeping through all of it began, for the first time, to notice the dark. Here is what Adaeze did not know about her husband. Min-Jae Park had not come to Lagos for logistics. He had come to Lagos because a man named Baek Sung-ho had sent for him, and Min-Jae was 24 and had no other directions. Baek was Korean, Lagos-based, charming in the specific and dangerous way of men who have learned to make their intentions look like your best interests. He had found Min-Jae at the lowest point of his life, no family, no money, a grief so fresh it was still raw at the edges, and offered him structure, work, a reason to get up. The Haiyan syndicate moved money across West Africa through a network of import-export companies so carefully constructed that the paper trails were almost art. Min-Jae's gift for financial architecture made him invaluable within 6 months. Baek was also the man Min-Jae had gone to see on that Wednesday in month 4. What Baek had told him in that meeting, what he had shown him, proven to him, made unmistakably clear, was that the syndicate had enemies inside Nigerian federal structures, and that those enemies had already begun cataloging the personal lives of senior members. "Your wife," Baek had said with the careful warmth of a man delivering a threat dressed as protection, "is a door, and you have left it open." Min-Jae drove home from that meeting and kissed his wife's forehead, and then spent the rest of the night sitting in the dark convincing himself that the kindest thing he could do was to become a stranger. If he loved her publicly, he endangered her. If no one could see how much she mattered to him, she was safe. It was the logic of a man who had grown up with no one to teach him that love does not actually work that way. His second in command was Daewon-oh, steady, observant, the kind of quiet that sees everything and comments on very little. Daewon had watched Min-Jae construct this particular form of self-destruction for 2 years and kept his own counsel about what he thought of it, because there are things you do not say to your boss even when you know you should. Then, on a Tuesday night, Min-Jae's emergency phone rang. The caller spoke in low, clipped Korean. Someone outside the syndicate's network had been running surveillance on Adaeze for 18 days, not tracking her for information, watching her movements with a specific pattern that meant someone was building a target profile. Min-Jae was silent for 6 full seconds before he said a word. Who authorized it? Unknown. Find out. Tonight. He ended the call and sat completely still and felt for the first time in 2 years the specific cold terror of realizing that the wall he had built around his feelings had not protected her from anything. It just meant that when danger finally came, she was standing outside it alone and didn't even know to be afraid. He picked up his personal phone and opened her contact. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long time. He didn't press it, because what would he say? I've been keeping you at arm's length for 2 years to protect you, and it hasn't worked, and I don't know how to tell you any of that. He put the phone down. He drove home. He stood outside their bedroom door in the dark and listened to her breathe on the other side of it, and he told himself she was safe, and he almost believed it. Sola Bello was not a malicious woman. She was simply a woman who had never successfully resisted the impulse to share something delightful. It was a Friday. She had come by the restaurant to drop off the packaging samples Adaeze had been waiting for, and she found Adaeze and Kwame in the kitchen locked in a completely genuine argument about whether fermented locust beans could work in a Korean doenjang base. Adaeze had just said something that landed so precisely, so devastatingly correctly, that Kwame burst out laughing first, and she followed a half-second behind, and the two of them stood there in a kitchen at 10 p.m., losing it completely, Adaeze with her hand braced against the counter, head back, laughing from somewhere unguarded and deep. Sola took the picture, posted it, went home, thought nothing of it. The caption read, "My girl is eating life and she is not sharing. Flower, Queen." It collected 46 likes by midnight. Several of those likes came from accounts that were connected to people in Min-Jae's world. One of those people was Daewon Oh, who saw it, screenshotted it, and the next morning placed his phone face up on Min-Jae's desk without a word and stepped back. Min-Jae looked at the picture for a very long time. There was nothing objectively wrong with it, a woman, a kitchen, laughter. But the man in the picture, Kwame, easy and warm beside his wife, present in a way that felt effortless, was everything Min-Jae had spent 2 years making himself not be. And Adaeze in that picture was not performing. She was not managing herself. She was full, open, completely, entirely herself. He had not seen her look like that in so long that it took him a moment to remember it was her face. He set the phone face down on the desk. He said nothing to Daewon. He picked up his pen and returned to his documents, and Daewon stood near the door and watched his boss and felt something shift in the room that he could not immediately name and did not like. That night, for the first time in 8 months, Min-Jae came home before midnight. Adaeze was in the kitchen, washing a single dish, her back to the door. She heard him come in, and she did not turn around. He stood in the kitchen doorway and opened his mouth and closed it again. Eventually, he said, "Is there food?" which was the most cowardly sentence he had spoken in years, and he knew it immediately. She dried her hands, opened the fridge, removed a covered plate and put it on the counter. "Microwave is there," she said, and went to bed. He stood in that kitchen alone with the covered plate and understood for the first time with real clarity what he had been doing to her. The story started on a Thursday at a lunch table Min-Jae was not at. Bak Sung-ho was not a man who made obvious moves. He was a man who placed information into a system and allowed the system to do what systems do: amplify, distort, and deliver consequences he could claim no direct part in. What he placed into the Hyun network that Thursday was a carefully shaped fragment that a federal financial crimes unit had received internal documents, account structures, transfer dates, operational patterns that could only have come from inside a senior operator's household. The implication floated without being stated. It didn't need to be stated. These things never do. It reached Daewon through a mid-level courier who delivered it casually, as though it were already settled fact. Daewon thanked him, excused himself, walked to a stairwell 4 floors below, and stood in it for 3 minutes, breathing steadily and thinking. He had watched Adaze's life for weeks at this point. He knew exactly what her days looked like and what they didn't look like. He also knew exactly what kind of instrument could build a story like this, and exactly who in this organization had both the motive and the architecture to do it. This was not gossip. This was a constructed weapon wearing gossip's clothes. He did not go to Min-Jae immediately. He needed to build the counter before he revealed the attack. He opened a private file that evening and began working, quietly, methodically, with the focus of a man who understands that everything now depends on what he can prove before someone else acts first. Nobody told Adaeze. Adaeze was in her kitchen at Ia Sunshine at 6 a.m., working on a sauce that had been almost right for a week and would not be allowed to remain almost right. She had no idea that 3 floors above her, in an office she had never visited, a lie about her was traveling through a criminal organization at the speed of whispered certainty. She salted her sauce. She tasted it. She adjusted. She was completely, blessedly unaware. What she was aware of, what she noticed that same morning, was that Min-Jae had started doing something strange. He was coming home at dinner time, not every night, but enough. He would sit at the kitchen table while she cooked and not say very much, just sit there in a way that had no obvious agenda. One evening, she put a plate of fried plantain on the table between them without being asked to, and he looked at it the way a man looks at something he thought he'd lost. He ate 3 pieces and thanked her. She said nothing, but she felt it, a small involuntary loosening somewhere in her chest that she immediately tried to put back. She told Sola on a Thursday morning while they prepped, "He's just showing up, sitting around, not saying much." Sola stopped cutting onions. "Is he sick?" "No." "Is he in trouble?" "I don't know." Sola set her knife down. "Then he's waking up," she said, with the absolute certainty of a woman who had seen this film before, even if the actors had changed. "And you need to decide what you do with that before he figures out what he's doing." Sola said nothing, but that evening, for the first time in 11 months, she set a second place at the dinner table and left a glass of water at it. Min-Jae came home at 7. He saw the table. He sat down. Neither of them acknowledged what it meant. They ate in a silence that was different from all the other silences, quieter and somehow warmer, and completely loaded with things neither of them was ready to say. On a Sunday morning, 4 weeks into this fragile new orbit, Adaeze found the letters. She had been looking for the restaurant's insurance document, which she was certain she had filed in Min-Jae's home office because her own filing system had experienced what Sola diplomatically called a creative period. She was moving folders, opening drawers, minding her own business, when she found them in the bottom of the 3rd drawer under a manila folder. 3 envelopes, white, sealed, her name on the front of each in Min-Jae's precise, compressed handwriting, and on the back of each envelope, barely visible, a date written in pencil. She picked up the first one, read the date, their first anniversary. She picked up the second, their second, third. She stood over that drawer and felt her legs do something unreliable beneath her, and she sat down on the floor because the chair felt too far away. 3 anniversaries, 3 letters, written, sealed, put in a drawer, never given. She thought about where she had been on each of those anniversaries. The first one, she had made a reservation at a restaurant she thought he might like, and he had come home at 11, found her asleep on the couch, still in the dress she'd worn to wait for him, and she had woken up the next morning to find a blanket over her and no note. The second one, she had stopped making plans and had spent it alone in the Ia Sunshine kitchen testing recipes, because at least there her efforts were received. The third she had not acknowledged at all, to herself or to anyone, because acknowledging it would have required grieving it. She sat on the floor of his office with 3 sealed letters in her lap and felt the full, awful, specific weight of 3 years of a man who had felt something, written it down, and swallowed it. not because he felt nothing, because he felt too much and had no idea what to do with any of it. And she had spent those same 3 years standing outside the door of a man she thought had gone cold, when really he had been standing on the other side of it, holding something he was too afraid to hand over. She put them back, exactly as she found them, and she went to the kitchen and started cooking something she didn't need and didn't speak for a very long time. The rumor reached Min-Jae on a Monday. Bak took him to lunch at a private restaurant in Victoria Island, ordered for both of them without consulting the menu, and then waited until the food arrived before leaning forward and saying with enormous performative reluctance that there was something he had heard that he felt Min-Jae deserved to know. He laid it out like a man who deeply wished he didn't have to. The alleged documents, the federal contact, the timeline that had been constructed to point directly at someone in Min-Jae's household, someone with access, someone's movements outside the home who had become less predictable. Min-Jae listened to all of it without speaking. He drove back to his office in silence. He sat at his desk and turned it over in his mind the way you turn something over when you already know the answer you're going to reach, but you aren't ready to reach it. He thought about the photograph, the late nights, the new contract she had never mentioned, the man she worked with every evening whose name she had never once said to him. He reached for his certainty, the certainty that his wife was not this person, could not be this person, and found it that it came slowly, too slowly, and in the gap between the reaching and the finding, something cracked. He didn't go to the restaurant for a week. He still made her coffee every morning, her blend, her cup, left warm on the counter before he disappeared. But he stopped sitting at the kitchen table in the evenings, stopped showing up. The small, fragile space they had been building between them quietly went cold, and Adaeze lay awake on Thursday night, tracing back through everything, trying to find the moment it had shifted, and found nothing, because the thing that had shifted had nothing to do with anything she had done. She just didn't know that yet.
Daewon placed the report on Min-Jae's desk on a Wednesday evening. It was not the report Min-Jae had expected. He had asked for an account of Adaze's daily movements, a clinical confirmation, he told himself, that she was safe. What Daewon had instead compiled was a quiet, detailed, and absolutely devastating portrait of what Adaze's life actually looked like. The 6 a.m. arrivals at the restaurant, the way she moved through the kitchen, what Daewon had written with the careful language of a man choosing his words, purposeful, as though the space belongs to her completely, which it does. The evenings that ran long, the contract meetings, the work that was real and serious and hers. And then, at the bottom of page 3, the detail that broke something in Min-Jae's chest that had been sealed for 2 years. On 4 of 7 evenings observed, the subject returned to the Meridian before entering the building, but did not go upstairs immediately. She remained in her vehicle in the underground garage for periods ranging from 11 minutes to 47 minutes. On 3 of these occasions, evidence of distress was visible upon approach to the vehicle. On one occasion, she was observed through the window with her face in her hands. Each time, before leaving the vehicle, she appeared to compose herself fully before proceeding to the elevator. She had been crying in the parking garage, alone, in the dark, below the building where he slept. And then she had put herself together, fixed her face, walked upstairs, walked through their front door, and been composed and unreachable and fine. Every night, for God knows how long. Min-Jae read that paragraph 4 times. He pressed both hands flat on the desk. He looked at the page for a long time, and then he pushed back his chair, stood up, put on his coat, and went to find his wife, not to interrogate her, not to manage the situation, but because he could not read those words and sit still. He found her at Ia Sunshine. She was locking up, alone, keys in hand, coat over her arm, the particular tiredness in her shoulders of someone at the end of a day that had asked a great deal of her. She saw him before he reached her. She stopped. She did not look pleased. She did not look frightened. She looked, if anything, tired in a way that went much deeper than the workday. "What are you doing here?" He opened his mouth. He had not, in the car, figured out exactly what he was going to say when he arrived. He should have figured that out. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she shook her head, not in anger, in something more exhausted than anger, and walked past him to her car. He stood alone on the pavement outside her restaurant at 11 p.m. and understood completely what he had become in her story. They came for her on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. Dramatically would have been something she could have fought. What came for Adaeze with a phone call from a number she didn't recognize, a man's voice on the other end offering nothing except an address and the phrase, "Bak Sung-ho would like to speak with you personally, and he asks that you come alone." She should have refused. She knew the moment she heard it that she should have refused. But there was a question underneath that invitation that she could not walk away from. Where is my husband in all of this, and what does he know? She went alone. She did not tell Sola. She told herself this was to protect Sola. It was partly true. The building in Ikoye was clean and silent and indistinguishable from a dozen corporate offices on the same street. Inside, long corridor, long room, long table. Bak Sung-ho at one end, suited, warm-faced, with a glass of mineral water and the practiced ease of a man accustomed to deciding things before the other party arrives. "Thank you for coming," he said, as though she had a choice. She sat. Her heart was loud, but her hands were still. Mama Okonkwo had given her that, the stillness that operates independently of what is happening inside you. Bak laid out the allegation with the patient warmth of a man who wanted her to understand that this was painful for him too. The documents, the federal contact, the operational details that had reached the wrong ears. He did not accuse her directly. He simply assembled the picture and left her inside it. She said, "I want to speak to my husband." Bak smiled. "Min-Jae is aware of the situation. We thought it—" "I did not ask you what you thought. I asked you to bring me my husband." The door opened. Min-Jae walked in, and Adaeze looked at his face, and something cold and precise moved through her that she would remember for the rest of her life. Because she knew that face, she had studied it for 3.5 years across dinner tables and dark hallways and the brief moments when his guard came down by accident. She knew every version of it, and the version she was looking at now, the tightness around his jaw, the deliberate neutrality of his eyes, the effort it was taking him to be unreadable, told her the one thing she had not prepared herself for. He was not certain. Even now, even here, looking at her across a table in a room designed to make her look guilty, some part of him was still deciding. She turned back to the table. She did not speak again. She understood with a cold, clear instinct that anything she said in this room would be used, and so she would not give them the satisfaction of defending herself. She sat straight, she waited, and she felt, beneath everything else, beneath the fear and the anger and the careful stillness, a grief that had nothing to do with Bak Sung-ho. The door opened again. Daewon walked in. He placed a folder on the table, not on Bak's end, on Min-Jae's. "Read this before anyone says another word," he said. He did not sit down. He stood and waited. What was in the folder had taken Daewon 6 weeks to build. Every conversation that had carried the rumor, traced back through its chain. The origin point, not a federal investigator, not a leak from inside the marriage, but a single instruction that had been drafted in this building and seeded into the network by 3 men who reported directly to Bak. The fabricated timeline, the manufactured evidence, and then the piece that nobody in the room had seen coming, including Daewon until 3 days ago, the full identity and record of the actual federal informant who had been feeding operational data to investigators for the past 7 months. Daewon read the name aloud, slowly, looking directly at Bak. The room went so quiet that the sound of traffic outside the street became audible. Bak's composure did not break, but it developed a fault line, a small, visible tremor at the edge of his mouth that Adaeze saw and would remember. Min-Jae looked up from the folder, he looked at back, and then he looked at Adaeze, and what was on his face now was not doubt, it was the specific expression of a man who had just understood the full shape of his own failure, not only Back's manipulation, but his own willingness to hesitate, his own capacity, even for a moment, to sit with a lie about a woman who had covered his plate for 3 Tuesdays in a row. Adaeze looked back at him. She did not look away, and what was on her face, the thing that would keep him awake for weeks afterward, was not anger. It was something quieter and more permanent than anger. It was the face of a woman calculating what this moment cost her and deciding whether she was willing to keep paying it. Baek Sung-ho was arrested 4 days later. Daewon had been building the cooperation package for federal authorities for 2 months, the same 2 months he had been watching Adaze's movements, and the handover was clean and complete and required nothing dramatic. Min-Jae signed his own name to the final documents. He had not discussed it with anyone. He did not feel it needed discussion. The syndicate was not his. The debt he owed back had been paid in blood and years, and a marriage that had nearly died in the paying. He was done. He sent a document to Adaze's lawyer on a Monday morning, the penthouse, transferred to her name. A separate document, a capital injection into Ia Sunshine's business account, enough for a full year of operations, the Echo Grand expansion, and a second location if she wanted it. No covering letter, no condition, no request attached. Just the documents, delivered quietly, the way a man delivers something when he understands that words are not currently the currency. Then he checked into a small hotel in Ikeja and stayed there for 3 weeks while Adaeze figured out what she needed to figure out. She was at Mama Okonkwo for most of it. Her mother had extended her visit without comment, which was comment enough. Sola was there too, because Sola materialized wherever Adaeze was in a crisis, like certain plants grow toward light, automatically, without being asked. The 3 of them occupied Mama Okonkwo's rented flat in Suralala with the easy, quiet coexistence of a family that has learned to be in hard moments together. Adaeze did not spend those 3 weeks raging. She spent them afraid, genuinely bone-deep afraid, in a way she had not allowed herself to be in the room with Baek because there was no room for it there. The fear was not of Min-Jae. The fear was of the world he had been living inside, parallel to their marriage, close enough to touch. The things she had not known, the danger she had been adjacent to without her knowledge or consent. She needed to sit with all of that.
To know, without anyone standing in front of her waiting for an answer, whether she wanted to walk back into even the clean aftermath version of that life. Mama Okonkwo cooked constantly. She prayed in the early mornings loudly enough that Adaeze could hear her through the wall, which she suspected was not accidental. She did not give advice. She had already given every piece of advice she had. Now, she simply stayed. It was during those 3 weeks that Sola and Kwame Asante became official. Not quietly. Nothing involving Sola was quiet. He appeared at Mama Okonkwo's door on a Wednesday evening with flowers and the energy of a man who had run out of patience with his own restraint, and he told Sola through the door screen that he had been attempting to ask her out for 2 months and was done being subtle. Mama Okonkwo appeared behind Sola before anyone could stop her, took a full inventory of Kwame from head to shoe, and said, "You took too long," and returned to the kitchen. Sola opened the door 4 seconds later. Adaeze watched the entire thing from the couch and laughed. Genuinely, completely. The first real laugh in days. Because life does not pause. It keeps going right through the middle of the hard parts, demanding that you feel all of it at once. The grief and the warmth and the ridiculous, precious comedy of your best friend getting a boyfriend through a door screen while your mother issues a verdict from the kitchen. On a Saturday afternoon, Adaeze went back to the penthouse for more of her things. Min-Jae was not there. She moved through the apartment efficiently, deliberately not looking at the things that would slow her down.
She was almost done when she paced his bookshelf and noticed that one of the books was sitting at an angle. She straightened it without thinking, and a small notebook slipped out from behind it and fell open on the floor. She picked it up. She should have closed it. She would have told you later that she should have closed it. But she saw her name in the first line. Not a document, not a business note, just her name, written in his handwriting in the middle of a page. And she couldn't. It was a private record. 3 years of them. Observations, thoughts, specific moments he had apparently found worth preserving. The particular way she argued with delivery drivers. A recipe she hummed without knowing she was humming it.
A joke she had made at a New Year's party in 2022 that she had completely forgotten, and he had apparently turned over in his head enough times to write down. Things she had said that he disagreed with and had thought about long enough to understand. One entry that stopped her completely. She thanked the cleaner by name today. Not the same cleaner as last week. A different one. She'd learned the name. And that was it. That was the whole entry. As though the fact of it was enough. As though it said everything he needed to say about who she was. She sat down on the floor of his study. Not in the chair. On the floor. Because she didn't trust her legs. She held that notebook and read it, and felt something in her chest come apart in the specific, quiet way of things that had been held together by the wrong kind of tension for too long. He had been watching the whole time. 3 years of silence and absence and covered plates, and underneath all of it, a man paying attention to every single thing, writing it down in private, and never finding the courage or the freedom to cross the distance and give it to her. She put the notebook back. She sat in his study for a very long time. Then she went back to Sewer Larry, and she did not tell anyone what she had found. But Sola looked at her face when she came through the door, and very wisely said nothing at all.
He did not come to her. He waited. He came to Aya Sunshine instead. 6 a.m, 11 days after she found the notebook, standing on the pavement outside the locked door when she arrived to open up. No call, no message, just there, hands in his pockets, not asking anything. She unlocked the door. She looked at him through the glass for a moment. Then she walked to the back and started her prep work. He waited on the pavement. After 90 minutes, she came to the front door and opened it. "Come and do something useful," she said. He came inside. He failed her grandmother's puff puff recipe 4 times. This is important because each failure was a different kind of failure, and she corrected each one without softening it, and he accepted each correction without defending himself. And something in the accumulation of this, the failing and the correcting and the trying again, became the most honest conversation they had managed in 3 years. Sola arrived at attempt 2 and stationed herself in the corner with a cup of tea and the barely suppressed excitement of someone at a sporting event they have waited a very long time to attend. Mama Okonkwo called, somehow, during attempt 3, as though she had a spiritual alert system for moments of significance, and Adaeze put her on speaker, which meant Min-Jae received live and extremely detailed feedback from Sir Leray on both his puff-puff technique and the general quality of his choices as a husband. He absorbed all of it. He said, "Yes, Mom," so many times that Sola started counting. Adaeze was laughing, genuinely, unguardedly, the whole body kind. She wasn't performing it. It was simply happening. During attempt 4, while the oil was heating, Adaeze disappeared into the back and came out with 3 white envelopes. She set them on the counter between them. Min-Jae looked at them and went very still. She sat on the stool across the counter and opened the first one.
She read it quietly. All of it. Every word he had written on their first anniversary, and sealed and put away and never given her. The kitchen was silent. Sola, to her eternal credit, had picked up her tea and moved to the other end of the restaurant the moment she saw the envelopes, taking herself completely out of earshot. Mama Okonkwo had gone quiet on the phone. Adaeze opened the second letter. She read it. She opened the third. She read it to the last line and set it down beside the others and looked at all three of them open on the counter and said nothing for a very long time. You wrote them, she said finally. Not a question. Yes. Every year. Yes. And every year you put them in the drawer. He didn't answer that. The answer was already there. Min-Jae. She looked up at him. What were you afraid of? And the question was not rhetorical. She wanted to know. She had always wanted to know. And now, finally, here, with 3 years of unsent letters between them, she was asking directly. He looked at the counter. He looked at the envelopes. And then he looked at her. The full, difficult, undefended kind of looking that he had been managing to avoid for 3 years. And he said, I was afraid that if you saw how much you mattered to me, the wrong people would see it too. And I was afraid that if I gave you that and then something happened to you. He stopped. I thought keeping you at a distance kept you safe. I understand now that it only kept you alone. Adaeze was quiet for a long moment.
Then she said, that is the most heartbreaking and the most stupid thing I have ever heard. And somehow, the way she said it, with complete honesty and no cruelty at all, broke something in the room open. He laughed first. She followed. And they stood on either side of a counter covered in flour and 3 unsent love letters. And they laughed until it became something else. And then they both stood quietly with the weight of what it had cost to get here. We don't start over, she said when she could speak again. We don't pretend 3 years didn't happen. We start forward, from right here, with all of it. He nodded. Okay. And Min-Jae, she looked at him directly. If you ever protect me by disappearing again, I will not be here when you come back. I know. Good. The oil was ready. Attempt 5. Golden, airy, perfectly executed. She bit into one and went still. Tasted it again slowly. Looked up at him. You got it. The almost smile from a rainy rooftop in Egoe, the one that had quietly started the whole story, finally came all the way in. No holding back. No almost. Just the real thing. Unhurried and complete. The kind that had always been there waiting for the right conditions to make it all the way to his face. Weeks later, 6 in the morning. Adaeze sunshine not yet open. The street outside still purple and quiet. Adaeze arrived through the back door to find the lights already on, the recipe card propped against the mixer, and Min-Jae standing at the counter with flour on his collar and his brow furrowed over a wrist in battle like it owed him something personal. He was muttering in Korean under his breath, not frustrated.
Hear her come in. She stood in the doorway and watched him. The flour, the furrowed concentration, the fact that he was here before the city woke up. Nobody watching, nothing to prove. Just a man who had finally learned that showing up small and consistent and early, before there is any audience for it, is the only kind of showing up that counts for anything. She said his name softly. He turned,
flour on his jaw, apron slightly sideways, entirely and completely himself in a way she had not seen in 3 years. She walked to the counter and tasted what was resting. She closed her eyes, tasted again. "You got it," she said, and the way she said it meant more than the puff puffs. Outside the front window, the AfroKorean partnership signage caught the first flat light of morning. 2 locations now, a wait list, a restaurant built by a woman from Warri with a borrowed suitcase and a mother who taught her that love is not a feeling you wait to be given. It is a thing you build and keep building, even when your hands are the only ones on it, especially then. On the wall near the service window, in a small dark frame, hung the photograph Sola had posted on a Friday night without thinking. Adaeze laughing in the kitchen,
Hand on Kwame's arm, her whole face open. It had started everything, that photograph. It had made a man who had buried himself look up and finally see what he had been doing. Adaeze had framed it herself. Min-Jae had seen it the first morning he came into that kitchen and had not said a word. She had watched him see it and had not said a word. There are things that do not need to be spoken when both people already understand exactly what is being said. 2 people, flour on the counter, the smell of brown butter warming in the pan, a city outside beginning to wake up that knew nothing about what it had taken to get here. Just a morning, just a Tuesday, just everything. If this story found you somewhere you didn't expect, if the covered plates hit differently than you thought, or the letters in the drawer made you set your phone down for a second, then you already know what this was really about. Not jealousy, not betrayal. 2 people learning.
The hardest way that love kept secret to protect someone is still love withheld, and that the person standing in front of you every day, quietly absorbing your absence, deserves more than your fear of what might happen if you love them out loud. Tell me in the comments, which part stayed with you longest? Share this with someone who needs to hear a story like this today.